Ji-won Kim grabbed his old backpack and stepped off the transport shuttle. His heart was beating fast as he looked around Station Kepler 7. Everything here was so different from home. The walls looked like they were made of glass and metal that seemed to glow from inside. Strange sounds echoed through the hallways, clicks, whistles, and humming noises he had never heard before. A group of tall blue creatures walked past him. Their skin looked smooth like polished stone, and they moved without making any sound. Behind them came something that looked like a giant bug, walking on two legs, making soft clicking sounds as it talked to its friends. Ji-won tried not to stare, but it was hard. He had seen pictures of aliens in books, but seeing them in real life was completely different. "You must be the human student," a voice said behind him. Ji-won turned around and almost jumped. A ball of bright light was floating in the air, talking to him. He blinked a few times, wondering if he was dreaming. Yes, sir." "I'm Ji-won Kim," he said, trying to sound confident even though his voice shook a little. "I am Professor Nexus," the floating light replied. "Welcome to the Galactic Preparatory Academy. You are only the third human we have ever accepted here." The professor floated ahead, and Ji-won followed through corridors filled with the strangest mix of students he could imagine. Some looked like walking trees with silver bark. Others were so small they rode on floating platforms to reach normal height. A few students seemed to be made of living crystal that sparkled when they moved. They entered a huge classroom with seats of all different shapes and sizes. Some were clearly made for creatures much bigger than humans, while others looked tiny. Ji-won found a normal-sized chair and sat down, feeling very out of place. "Class, we have a new student joining us today," Professor Nexus announced. The other students turned to look at Ji-won with curious eyes. Well, the ones that had eyes. Some had other things that might have been eyes, or maybe something else entirely. A student made of what looked like living crystal raised her hand. Her voice sounded like wind chimes when she spoke. "Professor, what species is he? I've never seen anything like him before." "This is Ji-won, and he is human. His species comes from a planet called Earth." Ji-won waved awkwardly at his new classmates. A few of them made sounds that might have been greetings, though he couldn't be sure. "Earth?" said a student who looked like he was made of rock with glowing veins running through his body. "Never heard of it. Is it one of those peaceful garden worlds where nothing exciting ever happens?" Before Ji-won could answer, another student spoke up. This one was tall and thin, almost see-through, like he was made of mist. "Those garden world species usually have trouble keeping up here. The Academy is designed for the galaxy's smartest and strongest species." Ji-won felt his cheeks get warm. He wanted to say something back, but he didn't want to start trouble on his first day. Instead, he just nodded and tried to smile. Professor Nexus continued with the orientation. "Students, you come from 47 different worlds across the galaxy. Each of you represents the best your species has to offer. The next 4 years will test everything you think you know about survival, intelligence, and teamwork." Lunch break. Ji-won sat alone at a table, eating something that looked like food but tasted like nothing he had ever tried before. The crystal student, who had introduced herself as Vera, floated over to his table. Behind her came the rock-like student called Coda and the misty one named Thane. "So human," Vera said, her crystal body reflecting the cafeteria lights. "What's your planet like? All sunshine and gentle breezes, I imagine." Ji-won thought about home for a moment. He remembered the last camping trip with his family when they had to shelter from a sudden thunderstorm that shook the ground. He thought about swimming in the ocean during summer, always watching for jellyfish and riptides. He remembered winter mornings when the cold made his breath visible and walking outside felt like stepping into a freezer. "It's pretty normal, I guess," he said finally. "We have weather. Sometimes it gets hot, sometimes cold. We have oceans and mountains and forests." "Sounds boring," Thane said, his misty form shifting colors slightly. "My homeworld has floating cities that move through gas clouds. The pressure down at surface level would crush most species flat. Mine has crystal formations that sing in the wind," Vera added proudly. "The harmonics can shatter weak materials from miles away." Coda's rocky surface glowed brighter. "My people live inside active volcanoes. We feed on mineral deposits that would poison other life forms." Ji-won nodded, politely, feeling more and more like he didn't belong here. His planet sounded so ordinary compared to theirs. No floating cities, no singing crystals, no volcano homes, just regular old Earth with its regular old problems. But as he listened to his new classmates talk about their amazing homeworlds, Ji-won couldn't help thinking that maybe they had never experienced some of the things he took for granted. Had they ever felt rain on their skin? Did they know what it was like to climb a tree or build a campfire? He decided to keep quiet for now and see what happened next. 3 weeks into the semester, Professor Nexus announced the first major test. All students had to gather in the Academy's main launch bay, where a massive transport ship waited with its engines humming. Today you will face your first survival challenge. The professor's glowing form pulsed brighter. You'll be dropped on Simulation World Gamma 7 for 72 hours. This planet has been rated as moderately hazardous, which means it presents real dangers, but nothing that should overwhelm properly prepared students. Ji-won looked around at his classmates. Most of them seemed nervous, their various forms of communication creating a buzz of worried sounds throughout the bay. Vera's crystal body was flickering with different colors, which Ji-won had learned meant she was stressed. Thane kept shifting between solid and misty forms, unable to stay stable. Even Coda's rocky surface had dimmed to a dull glow. You may bring standard Academy survival gear, Professor Nexus continued. Each team will have basic supplies, but remember, this is a test of your natural abilities and training. As they boarded the transport, Ji-won noticed something strange. His classmates were wheeling in huge metal containers filled with equipment. Vera had what looked like a portable laboratory. Thane carried atmospheric processors and environmental suits. Coda brought devices that Ji-won couldn't even identify, all beeping and flashing with various lights. Ji-won looked down at his own supplies. He had packed like he was going on a weekend camping trip back home, some basic tools, a first aid kit, extra clothes, and some energy bars. His whole pack was smaller than just one of Vera's equipment cases. Is that all you're bringing? Thane asked, his misty form swirling with what might have been confusion. Yeah, should be enough, Ji-won replied, hefting his lightweight backpack. The other students exchanged glances. Coda's surface brightened slightly, which Ji-won had learned was the equivalent of a laugh. Humans must be even more primitive than we thought. He doesn't even understand what moderately hazardous means. The transport ship rumbled as it left the station and headed toward their destination. Through the windows, Ji-won could see a planet that looked almost Earth-like, with blue and green patches and white clouds swirling around it. It actually looked quite beautiful and peaceful. When they landed, the other students immediately began setting up their equipment. Environmental suits whirred to life, scanners beeped constantly, and protective barriers hummed with energy. The sounds of all their technology created a constant background noise that reminded Ji-won of a construction site. Ji-won stepped out of the ship and took a deep breath. The air felt fresh and clean, maybe a little thinner than Earth's atmosphere, but nothing he couldn't handle. The gravity felt slightly heavier, like wearing a heavy backpack, but still manageable. The temperature was cool and comfortable, reminding him of early autumn back home. Careful, Vera called out, her voice coming through a speaker in her environmental suit. The atmospheric readings show potential toxins. Ji-won looked at his basic air quality detector, a simple device that would beep if the air was truly dangerous. It stayed silent. He shrugged and continued breathing normally, while his teammates sealed themselves inside their protective gear. Their first challenge came within hours. The team was walking through what looked like a normal forest when they encountered their first deadly native creature. It was about the size of a house cat, with 8 legs and fur that changed colors. The creature had multiple eyes and made a soft chirping sound. Vera screamed from inside her environmental suit. Thane immediately activated some kind of energy weapon, though he kept it pointed safely away from the creature. Coda's rocky form began glowing bright red, which meant he was ready to fight. It's a Class 7 predator, Thane shouted. Highly aggressive, venomous bite. Everyone stay back. The little creature looked at them curiously, tilted its head and chirped again. It seemed more interested than threatening. Ji-won knelt down and slowly extended his hand. The creature sniffed his fingers, decided he wasn't interesting, and wandered away into the bushes. What just happened? Vera whispered. I think it was just curious, Ji-won said. It didn't seem hostile. But the scanner readings showed maximum danger levels, Coda protested. Ji-won thought about the raccoons back, home that would raid garbage cans at night. They looked scary if you didn't know them, but they usually just wanted food and would leave you alone if you didn't bother them. This creature had reminded him of those raccoons. The next challenge came when the temperature dropped as evening approached. Ji-won's teammates began activating heating systems in their suits and setting up thermal shelters that glowed with artificial warmth. The temperature has dropped to near freezing levels, Thane announced, checking his readings. This is becoming deadly. Ji-won looked at his simple thermometer. It read about 40 degrees, chilly, but nothing worse than a typical October evening back home. He put on his jacket and felt perfectly comfortable. How is he not dying? Vera whispered to Coda, watching as Ji-won calmly gathered some dry wood and started building a small campfire. Maybe humans are tougher than they look, Coda whispered back, his glow dimming with uncertainty. As night fell, Ji-won's teammates huddled inside their high-tech emergency shelters, monitoring environmental readings and discussing survival strategies. Meanwhile, Ji-won had built a simple lean-to shelter, caught some fish from a nearby stream using techniques his grandfather had taught him, and was now roasting dinner over his campfire. The smell of cooking fish drifted over to the other shelters. Through their protective barriers, his teammates watched in amazement as the primitive human seemed to be having a relaxing camping trip on what they considered a dangerous alien world. 2 weeks after the survival test, Ji-won noticed his classmates acting differently around him. They would whisper when he walked by, and conversations would stop when he joined a group. He figured they were still talking about how he had handled the dangerous planet, but he didn't think it was that big a deal. During xenobiology class, Professor Nexus was teaching about different types of planets across the galaxy. The floating ball of light projected images of various worlds onto the classroom wall, some covered in ice, others with purple skies, and a few that looked like they were made entirely of metal. As you can see, Professor Nexus explained, we classify planets based on how dangerous they are for most life forms. Class 1 planets are paradise worlds. Perfect temperature, clean air, no dangerous animals. Most civilized species prefer to live on Class 2 or 3 planets, which are safe and comfortable. Vera raised her crystalline hand. What about Class 4 and 5 planets, Professor? Those require some preparation and technology to live on safely. Class 6 and 7 planets are considered quite dangerous. Only military training happens on those worlds. Class 8 planets are used for extreme survival training, and anything above that is considered too dangerous for most species to survive. Ji-won found this interesting, but he was curious about something. He raised his hand. Professor, what class is Earth? I've never heard anyone mention it. The professor's glowing form flickered. Let me check our planetary database. A moment of silence passed, then another. The flickering became more intense. This can't be right. Let me double-check. The classroom became very quiet. Even the usual chattering and clicking sounds from the insectoid students stopped completely. According to our official records, Professor Nexus said slowly, your home planet Earth is classified as Class 11. You could have heard a pin drop. Vera's crystal body went completely clear, which Ji-won had learned meant she was in shock. Thane's misty form became so unstable he almost disappeared entirely. Coda's rocky surface lost all its glow and turned completely black. That's impossible, whispered a snake-like student from the back of the room. Class 11 is one step below, completely uninhabitable hellscape. There must be an error in the system, said another student who looked like a walking tree. No intelligent life could evolve on a Class 11 world. But Professor Nexus was still reading from the database, and his voice was getting quieter with each fact. Extreme gravitational variations, atmospheric composition that would be toxic to most species, temperature fluctuations exceeding 100 degrees, regular natural disasters capable of reshaping entire continents. Ji-won shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was starting to understand why everyone was staring at him with such wide eyes, or whatever they used for seeing. Wait, there's more. Professor Nexus continued. Seasonal climate changes that would require constant life support for most species, vast bodies of water containing predatory life forms, atmospheric pressure variations that could crush unprotected visitors. But Professor, Vera's voice was barely a whisper, our military uses Class 8 planets for the most extreme training exercises. What kind of creatures could survive on a Class 11 world? Professor Nexus accessed more data. According to this, the dominant species on Earth, humans, not only survive these conditions, but actually thrive in them. They live across the entire planet, from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts to high-altitude mountains, where the air is too thin for most species. All eyes turned to G1, who was starting to feel very uncomfortable. I mean, yeah, people live pretty much everywhere, back home. My cousin lives in Alaska where it gets really cold, and my uncle lives in Arizona, where it's super hot in summer. Really cold? Thane asked nervously. How cold? Oh, maybe -40 degrees in winter, but that's normal for Alaska. Several students made sounds that were probably the equivalent of gasping. On Thane's homeworld, anything below 50 degrees was considered an emergency situation. And the hot places? Vera asked. Desert areas can get up to 120 degrees in summer. People still live there, though. You just drink lots of water and stay in air conditioning during the hottest parts of the day. The classroom erupted in shocked murmurs. What G1 considered normal weather variations were temperature extremes that would kill most of the species in the room. Professor Nexus continued reading. The database also mentions something called natural disasters, earthquakes that can level cities, storms with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour, floods that can cover entire regions. Oh yeah, we get those sometimes, G1 said, trying to be helpful. Last year we had a really bad hurricane back home, lost power. For a week, but everyone was okay. The snake-like student made a hissing sound. You just live through disasters that could destroy entire civilizations? Well, we try to prepare for them. Like, during tornado season, lots of people have storm shelters, and we have early warning systems for most stuff. Coda's rocky surface started glowing again, but it was a confused, flickering light. Tornado season. You have a season specifically for destructive atmospheric phenomena? Spring in the Midwest gets pretty active, Jiwon shrugged, but you learn to deal with it. Professor Nexus accessed one final piece of data that made his glow dim significantly. The database indicates that humans engage in recreational activities on their homeworld that would be considered extreme survival training on Class 8 military worlds. What kind of recreational activities? Several students asked at once. Jiwon thought about it. Well, lots of people like camping and hiking. Some people climb mountains or go whitewater rafting. Surfing is popular near the oceans. Skiing in winter, normal stuff. The classroom fell silent again as the alien students tried to process what they had just learned. Their primitive classmate from the backwater planet was actually from one of the most dangerous worlds in the known galaxy, and he thought it was normal. After the shocking revelation about Earth's classification, word spread through the academy faster than G1 could have imagined. Within days, he couldn't walk down a hallway without students stopping their conversations to stare at him. Some looked frightened, others seemed fascinated, and a few appeared to be studying him like he was some kind of exotic creature. During lunch, instead of sitting alone like he used to, G1 found himself surrounded by curious classmates who peppered him with questions about his impossible homeworld. At first, he felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but gradually he began to enjoy sharing stories about home. "So tell us about the swimming you mentioned," Vera said one day, her crystal body shimmering with nervous energy. "You said you swim in the oceans?" Jiwon smiled, remembering summer days at the beach with his family. "Yeah, I love swimming in the ocean. The waves are fun to ride and the water feels great when it's hot outside, though you do have to be careful about jellyfish and riptides." "Jellyfish?" Thane's misty form swirled anxiously. "What are those?" "They're like transparent floating creatures with long tentacles that can sting you. Most of them aren't too bad. It hurts for a while, but you'll be fine. Though there are some really dangerous ones in tropical waters that you definitely want to avoid." The alien students exchanged worried glances. Swimming with any kind of stinging creature sounded terrifying to them. "But that's not the scary part," Jiwon continued casually. "You have to watch out for sharks, too. They're these big fish with rows of sharp teeth. Some of them can grow as long as this table. Coda's rocky surface flickered. You swim with predators. That could eat you? Well, shark attacks are pretty rare actually. Most sharks don't bother humans. But there are also whales in the ocean. Some of them are bigger than our transport ships. Blue whales can be over 100 feet long. You share the water with creatures larger than spacecraft? A snake-like student hissed in disbelief. Yeah, but whales are gentle giants. They mostly eat tiny fish and plants. I saw some dolphins once when I was swimming. They're really smart and friendly. They actually play with humans sometimes. As Ji-won talked, he pulled out his phone and showed them videos from his last beach vacation. The alien students watched in horrified fascination as humans dove into churning waves, surfed on boards that looked impossibly small, and swam in waters that contained creatures that could swallow most of them whole. This is what you do for fun? Vera whispered, watching a video of Ji-won's sister riding a wave on her surfboard. Oh yeah, surfing is awesome. The bigger the waves, the more exciting it gets. Though you have to be careful not to get caught in a wipeout. That's when the wave crashes down on you and tumbles you around underwater for a while. Another day, the conversation turned to land activities. Ji-won told them about camping trips with his family, hiking in the mountains and exploring forests. The air gets really thin when you go up high in the mountains, he explained. Sometimes people get altitude sickness and have to come back down. But the views are incredible, especially from the really tall peaks. How tall? Asked Thane. Well, Mount Everest is about 29,000 feet high. Lots of people try to climb it every year. People voluntarily go to altitudes where the air is too thin to breathe. Coda's glow dimmed with confusion. You need special equipment for the really high mountains, but yeah, it's challenging, but that's part of what makes it fun. My dad and I climbed a smaller mountain last summer, only about 10,000 feet. We had to camp overnight on the side of the mountain. The alien students couldn't understand why anyone would choose to sleep on the side of a mountain when they could be safe indoors. And winter? Vera asked. You mentioned it gets very cold. Oh, winter's great, Ji-won said enthusiastically. Everything freezes solid, and you can do all kinds of fun stuff. Skiing, snowboarding, ice skating, building snowmen. My little brother and I have snowball fights all the time. He showed them videos of himself skiing down a mountainside, moving, at what looked like dangerous speeds to his alien classmates. You throw yourself down mountains on thin strips of material, the snake-like student asked in horror. It's not as dangerous as it looks. Well, usually. Sometimes people get hurt, but that's part of the sport. Part of the sport is getting injured. Thane's form became very unstable. Not on purpose, but accidents happen. Broken bones, concussions, that kind of thing. Most people are fine, though. The more Ji-won talked about his normal life on Earth, the more amazed his classmates became. He told them about thunderstorms that could shake buildings, tornadoes that could destroy entire neighborhoods, and hurricanes with winds that could flip cars. Last year we had a really bad storm, he said, showing them news footage on his phone. Lost power for about a week, and there were trees down everywhere, but everyone just helped each other clean up afterward. You just clean up after disasters? That could level cities, Vera asked weakly. What else would you do? Can't just leave the mess there forever. He showed them videos of people surfing during storms, rock climbing on sheer cliff faces, and bungee jumping off bridges. To Ji-won, these were normal recreational activities. To his alien classmates, they looked like elaborate suicide attempts. Do humans have any concept of self-preservation? Coda asked after watching a video of someone base jumping off a building. Sure we do, Ji-won laughed. We just have different ideas about what's actually dangerous, I guess. The alien students began to realize that their primitive classmate wasn't just from a dangerous world. He was from a species that had turned survival on an impossible planet into entertainment. The final exam arrived 3 months later, and the entire academy buzzed with nervous energy. This wasn't going to be another simulation. This was the real test that would determine who graduated with honors and who barely scraped by. Professor Nexus gathered all the senior students in the main assembly hall. His glowing form pulsed brighter than usual, which everyone had learned meant he was excited about something. Students, your final challenge will take place on Hellworld Sigma 9, he announced. This is a Class 8 planet, one of the most dangerous worlds we use for testing. You'll have 72 hours to complete your mission as a team." The hall erupted in worried sounds. Class 8 planets were legendary at the Academy, places where even the most advanced species needed serious preparation just to survive. "The scenario is this," Professor Nexus continued. "Your transport ship has crashed. You must reach the emergency beacon located 50 miles away while dealing with volcanic activity, toxic atmospheric conditions, extreme temperature variations, and hostile native wildlife. Most importantly, you'll have limited equipment. Only what survives the crash." Jiwon looked around at his teammates. Over the months he had been assigned to work with Vera, Thane, Coda, and a few other students who had initially dismissed him as primitive. Now, after hearing his stories about Earth, they looked at him with a mixture of respect and hope. "Jiwon," Vera whispered, her crystal body flickering nervously, "please tell me this planet isn't worse than your camping trips." When they arrived at Hellworld Sigma 9, Jiwon understood why his classmates were so worried. The sky was a sickly yellow color, filled with ash and smoke from active volcanoes in the distance. The air smelled like sulfur and made everyone's equipment beep with warnings. The ground was rocky and uneven, covered with patches of what looked like acidic pools. Most teams immediately began frantically assembling whatever advanced equipment had survived the simulated crash. They set up atmospheric processors, activated personal force fields, and deployed scanner arrays that beeped constantly with danger warnings. Jiwon looked around and assessed the situation like his grandfather had taught him during their hiking trips. The sulfur smell was strong but not overwhelming, kind of like being near hot springs back home. The rocky terrain reminded him of hiking through Badlands in Utah. The temperature was hot but manageable, maybe like a summer day in Death Valley. "Okay, team," he said calmly. "This isn't as bad as it looks. The sulfur levels are annoying but not deadly if we stay upwind. See how the wind is blowing from the east? We'll want to travel with it, not against it." His teammates stared at him. While other groups were still setting up equipment, Jiwon was already planning their route. "But what about the toxic atmosphere?" Thane asked, his misty form barely holding together from stress. Jiwon checked his basic air quality monitor, the same simple device he'd used during their first survival test. "It's not great, but it's not going to kill us either. Just breathe shallow and take breaks when we need to." They started walking, while other teams were still arguing about which protective gear to use. Within the first hour, they encountered their first major challenge, a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a bear, with glowing red eyes and sharp claws. The other teams activated weapons systems and prepared for battle. Jiwon studied the creature's behavior and posture. "It's scared," he said quietly. "Look at how it's holding its head low and backing away slowly. It doesn't want to fight us." "But the scanners show it's extremely dangerous," Coda protested, his rocky surface glowing bright with alarm. "Scanner readings aren't everything," Jiwon replied. "This reminds me of mountain lions back home. They look scary, but they usually avoid humans if you give them space and don't act like prey." He slowly raised his arms above his head to make himself look bigger, maintained eye contact with the creature and began backing away slowly. Just like he'd learned during wilderness training with his dad, the creature decided they weren't worth the trouble and wandered off to find easier prey. "How did you know it would do that?" Vera asked in amazement. "Predators are pretty similar everywhere. Most of them don't want to fight unless they have to." As they continued their journey, Jiwon's earth-trained instincts proved invaluable again and again. When they needed water, he found a way to collect and purify moisture from the air using techniques he'd learned from survival shows. When they needed shelter from an acid rainstorm, he built a lean-to using local materials that kept them dry and safe. The volcanic activity that terrified his teammates reminded Jiwon of visiting Yellowstone National Park with his family. "Just stay away from the active vents and you'll be fine," he told them. "The ground might be warm, but as long as we're not standing directly on a heat source, we're okay." By the time they reached the emergency beacon, other teams were still struggling with basic survival. Some had called for emergency evacuation after their equipment failed. Others were holed up in defensive positions, too scared to move forward. When the transport ships arrived to pick up the surviving teams, professors and academy officials crowded around Ji-won's group, amazed that they had completed the course in record time with minimal equipment. "How did you do it?" asked Professor Nexus. Ji-won shrugged, thinking about all the family camping trips, hiking adventures and outdoor activities that had prepared him for this moment. "It reminded me of visiting Yellowstone, except Yellowstone has bears and this place doesn't." At the graduation ceremony, the Academy Director announced major changes to the curriculum. "We're adding new courses based on what we've learned from our human student," she said. "Advanced Deathworld survival techniques, natural hazard assessment, and primitive survival skills will now be required for all students." When Ji-won walked across the stage to receive his diploma, graduating with the highest honors in Academy, history, he thought about calling his sister Minji back on Earth. She'd probably laugh when he told her that their family camping trips were now considered elite military training by the rest of the galaxy. As he looked out at his alien classmates, cheering for him, Ji-won realized something important. Humans weren't primitive or weak. They were the ultimate survivors who had turned the most dangerous environment in the known galaxy into their playground. And now, the rest of the universe was finally starting to understand just how tough Earth's children really were.